Welcome to YERME interview series. My name is Dorota Lembrel and I am a YERME representative in the European Society of Research in Mathematics Education. And today I have a pleasure to interview the former president of YERME, Viviane Durand-Guerrier. Welcome, Viviane.
Thank you very much, Dorota. And Dylan, I am very happy to be there with you, and thank you for proposing to me this interview.
Very welcome, Viviane. So our interviews usually starts with a short introduction of our invited senior researcher. So we will begin with introduction to the audience, so the people will learn you and your career path.
Thank you.
So Viviane is a professor and coming from France, and you have a very, very long career in research, and we will walk ourselves and the listeners through your career to show the milestones in your work. So Viviane began her professional career as a secondary teacher of mathematics. And in 1996, you defended your PhD thesis on the logical concept of implication. It might be so that a little later in the interview when we talk, we get back to that topic and your interest in it. So we are very much looking forward to hear your story about it. In between 1998 and 2009, you have been working as a teacher trainer for primary school teachers at the Institute of Teacher Training in Lyon, in France. And in 2005, you have received a habilitation to supervise research, and you also might tell us a bit more about that later. But to my knowledge, this is a very special thing you do in France, some kind of, might not be a course, but this is some kind of merits, and you do that habilitation to be able to be a supervisor of PhD students, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, correct.
Yes, so in 2005 you received that habilitation. And in between year 2004 and 2007, you have been a president of YERME, is an association in research in didactics of mathematics in France, if I'm correct?
Yes, you are correct.
We also put in the French name. I think it's also very nice to include the original language in our presentation. And between year 2009 and 2020, you have been working as a full professor of didactics of mathematics at University in Montpellier. That is also where we had a YES summer school when you've been part of it at your university in 2018. And since 2020, you are a professor emeritus at University of Montpellier. Between 2014 and 2017, which many of the audience that might be listening have been heard about, you have been a president of the European Society for Research in Mathematics Education. To just give a couple of examples of the different places and associations and areas you've been working with, we have listed that you've been a member of the IMAC, is an institute which is also placed at in France, isn't it, as the University of Montpellier, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
It is the Math Lab research team in Montpellier, mathematics research team in Montpellier.
And then you also have been the head of the didactics and epistemology of mathematics team, call it DIMA.
Yes.
We also know that you've been working for many years as a coordinator for a relatively, I would say, known international network for didactics research in university mathematics, which is called INDRUM network. I think quite many of the person listening to the interview might recognize some of those networks and the names. So, very short overview. There's a lot of much to say about your work and your career path, but we present a couple of milestones or parts of your career as a researcher and where it all began as a secondary mathematics teacher. Is there anything, Viviane, you would like to add in here?
Yes, maybe I would like to say that I have been coordinator of a YERME of YES, not YERME, but of YES,
Yes.
For some sessions, and I was very, very happy to be to have this role and to know this YERME community in this occasion. So I was very happy to do this, and also we have many young researchers in the INDRUM network. Also, which
Yes.
is one of the aim of the network was to support young researchers in university mathematics education.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Viviane. So let's move on to one would say, a traditional way of having an interview. There will come questions and we will have a talk about it. So we move on. So we would like to begin with your current work as mathematics education researcher, and begin with a question related to what motivated you to become a mathematics education researcher. Please tell us.
So, I discovered by chance in the late 1980s that there existed a scientific domain, the didactics of mathematics, which was devoted to the study of the teaching and learning of mathematics. And this domain was centered to the discipline itself, which was not the case for other fields, such as psychology of education and so on. And I was interested in this field because the aim was to relate the students' difficulties to the complexity of mathematical knowledge that I was aware of. At that moment, I was a teacher. And this domain provided path to elaborate didactic situations likely to help students to overcome these difficulties. So this was very important for me, that the core of the discipline was the mathematics themselves. Mm-hmm. And when I discovered the existence of this field, I was a secondary teacher, but I decided to undertake doctoral studies in this field. I met Gilbert Arsac, who have been my supervisor for first a master's degree in didactics and then my PhD in didactics of mathematics. And he encouraged me because I explained to him that I had a strong background in logic. I have done my study in logic. It was in Paris in the 70s. And because I had a strong background in logic, he told me that it was interesting to explore this with a didactic perspective that has been very few done at that moment. And I was enthusiastic with this proposition because I was a teacher and I heard always my colleague complain that the students were illogical, that it was incredible that they do not understand. Why they do not understand what is an implication? It is so easy to understand what is an implication. It is an if-then, and if there is a counterexample, it is false. And I was, because of this background in logic, I was convinced that it was much more complicated. And so I thought that this was underestimated in the field, and I decided to work on this, as you mentioned, Dorota, in the presentation. So my PhD thesis were clearly on implication, and I show clearly the complexity of this notion.
Thank you very much. I think it's always so interesting to get to know and learn where the motivation is coming from, and I think that you share with us that you met another researcher who later became your supervisor, that you had an interest of learning more in a specific field, which you did something, and then to widen that perspective. I think many young researchers would also recognize themselves. Okay, that is also a little how my motivation have started or began. So thank you very much, Viviane, for this insight. It's very, very has it value to hear it from an experienced researcher about it.
Yeah, thank you.
So you already began a bit about where is your research interest in the didactics of logics, and so can you describe shortly or describe your area of research if you know someone will ask you? So can you please tell us a bit more?
Yeah. I have been a researcher in didactics and epistemology, this is very important for me, of mathematics for over 30 years now. My main topic concerns the relationships between logic, language, reasoning, argumentation and proof in the teaching and learning of mathematics from primary school, including preschool from 3 years in France, to university. And also with a concern with plurilingualism in different contexts. I have also been involved in research in calculus and analysis at university for over 15 years now, and being, as you mentioned, Dorota, an active member of the International Network for Didactic Research in University Mathematics. And this domain, University Mathematics, had been developed in France at the very beginning in the 70s. And then it was not so much developed, and there were a lot of isolated researchers on this topic. So we decided to create this network in international networks, and together we also created a French network on the same topic that we developed together in order to allow discussion. And maybe something which is important, and for young researchers working in this field, it is important to work with people who understand well the advanced mathematics at university, who are not afraid of hearing of advanced mathematics at university. And this is also the reason why we created this relation, and also to develop the relation with mathematicians. Because, of course, when you are working on university mathematics education, you need to have collaboration and interaction with mathematicians.
Thank you. So you're really giving a very clear picture of how different research field and domain. You said that epistemology and didactics are very close to, important to emphasize that you are in there, and also that there is so many connections in your area of research, which also begins with so young children, and then later the university mathematics. So there's so many connections in the field of mathematics research where you have been working. So thank you very much to give us the very short and brief, but still a very intense and colorful description of your area of research. Thank you, Viviane.
Yes.
So you are very welcome to add in something, please.
Yes, I would like to add that I am very interested in my work on the developmental point of view. For example, that was supported by Gérard Vergniaud, who is a French researcher, who was the last the doctoral student of Piaget. And the idea that the roots of mathematics are already present in preschool and primary school, and that we should rely on these roots when we go further in the curriculum is something very important. So this is the reason why I always think of this topic from primary school to university.
And you really share that when you describe it, your area of research. So that is very great. So let us talk a bit about what you do enjoy the most in your work as a mathematics education researcher. What do you think is the most fascinating and good and nice to do?
I must say that what I enjoy the most is the intellectual challenges that we face in mathematics education. First, revisiting mathematics. Of course, when you want to work on didactics of mathematics, you need to revisit the mathematics that you have learned previously. And also the epistemology of mathematics. This is very closely interacted in this didactic perspective. I also enjoy the links and the interaction with related discipline dealing with similar topics. For example, discipline dealing with logic and reasoning, such as history of mathematics, philosophy of mathematics, linguistics, psychology, and other didactics of discipline. So there is something which is the core of the work, which is centered around the mathematics, but there are a lot of discipline which are around and that we need to interact I need to interact in my research work. And this I enjoy because it is a way to keep open and not to be, we say, in French, we say, avoir la tête dans le guidon. That means to be very centered on what you are doing like this. And I think it's very important to, of course, at some moment you have this kind of behavior because you need it, but you need not to be always like this. So this aspect of the research work is for me very, very important.
And I also, from what you are saying, Viviane, might be thinking about that by working with other disciplines like you listed, then that also is opening up a new perspective and new ways of understanding your own area of research, isn't it? Because they are different way of understanding things in different disciplines, and you can bring that in to your research and then that learn a bit more, which means my understanding would be that this is about to be very open for knowledge which is not inside your own discipline, isn't it? Is it that what you say?
Yeah, this is exactly what I mean.
Yeah,
the connection with philosophy of mathematics is something which is very important for me, for example, and also with linguistics, because when you look from linguistic aspect, it's very important to work with a specialist of a field, but also because when you work with this kind of discipline, you bring also the knowledge of your own discipline. And for example, the linguistic issues that we face in mathematics are not well understood by those linguists who are educated in the literature area and so on. So this is very, very interesting to have this kind of collaboration. So it brings to us and we bring to
Yes. It's a two-direction street or two-way street, how to say it in a good English. So is there anything which you enjoy less? Is always everything in a way that is there anything that I enjoy less doing what?
Yes, what I enjoy the least is the time that I have to spend responding to calls for projects with very uncertain results. I have submit a lot of projects in my career, and not many of them were successful. In particular, in France, we are very, very selective project with less, between 15 or 20% success only. And so it's a lot of work. And then when you do not succeed, of course, you go on research, but you take a lot of time. So this is the part of the work that I enjoy the least.
Mm. But when it is successful and the grants are given, then it turns on the other side. Then
yes, so, of course. But even when it is successful, it is very often the case that you have spent so many time on the project that this time you could use it for doing research.
That's right. Yeah, you are right. There is a balance in that, and I guess through your career, you've been thinking about that. Is it really worth it? This is less enjoyable, and then, as you said, at that time you could spend. But on the other hand, there is a need to apply for grants and so on.
Yes,
that is how things works. Thank you, Viviane, for those insights. So we have been talking about your work, about your field of research, of what you enjoy. So we would like to move to a second part of the interview, which is about questions and insights related to your experience as a researcher in math education. So things that you can share with the audience, the young researchers, and those who listen. So we move into the second part. So we would like to ask you which advice or an advice you would have been helpful for you at the beginning of your career. You already mentioned at the beginning that you met a researcher in France and began to talk about your interest in logic and then didactics. And but is there any advices you got at the beginning of your careers or would like to get that you would be helpful for you?
Okay, so maybe the first thing that I would say is that when I was nearly at the end of my PhD, I was working together with doing my PhD as a secondary teacher. When I arrived nearly at the end, Gilbert Arsac told me, now you have to stop reading and finish to write. And I think it was very, very helpful advice, because each time I discovered something that I had not well understood, I wanted to read more. So this was very useful advice. But I would like to move to another, I think, thing that I would have need maybe at the beginning of my career. I was not at all aware of the publication process when I entered in the career. And in particular, I didn't understood the scope of a reviewer comments. What can I do with this reviewer comment? They told that there were many weaknesses in my work and how to take them in consideration in order to improve the initial version of enriched publication. The first paper, I give up. I didn't try. And now I think it was a pity that I didn't try to do this paper. And it takes me some time before being able to overcome a kind of deception that I had when I received the feedbacks on the weakness identified by the reviewers. And it is when maybe the best I have two first papers that were in educational studies. The first one, I was strongly supported by the editorial-in-chief. And the second one, I wrote it with my supervisor. And I understood at that moment, I began to understand, but it was some years after I had defended my PhD. So I think this is something very, very important. And I would have maybe I would have been happy to be more, to have more advices and more recommendation. And maybe I should have, I should have shared the comment of a reviewer with my supervisor, but I didn't dare do it. And so I was in front of this and I said, but he didn't understand nothing. What can I do? And I did nothing. So this was something that I think is very important when you are submitting your first papers. And now I think my first paper was for a journal, not for a conference. I think that beginning to submit in conference is something that is helpful then to move to a paper. But also it depends on your team and the support you have in your team. And maybe now we are more aware of this in the community also, maybe.
So can it be that the community in the research field and how things are organized might be a bit more transparent nowadays, more supportive, and there is some kind of, but I still would like to raise that I very much appreciate that you are sharing that, because I think even if you've been doing your PhD a while ago, and I think there was still might be young researchers who are listening to this interview recognize themselves in that if someone would just tell me, ask for help, there will be support systems. And I very much thank you, Viviane, for sharing this advice, that there might be always a help to get. You might have gotten a help, don't you think? But then you, at that point, as you said, you gave up, and I think that is also okay, and fair to hear that actually someone with so long career as you have actually somewhere in the career path actually gave up on a paper when comments came. I think it's also important to say. And your first advice, I think I just smiled a bit, but I think it's a very, very true advice and very good one. Stop reading, write.
Yes, it was really.
And I think that is especially somewhere at the end of PhD period. Yes, you can always do more. You can always try to understand more, but at the ending, your PhD process is actually about creating new knowledge, not about that you learn more, but you create new knowledge that others can read. So thank you for this advice, because it is so true, but you need to hear it, and most certainly from the supervisor who is a bit more experienced. The next question or area we would like to ask is if you could give one advice or suggestion you always give to your postgraduate students, what would it be?
Okay. My main advice is consider research as a personal, intellectual adventure that you will share at different periods of your career research project in research teams at local first, national, European, because we're in Europe, and worldwide level. Another advice is to move to primary source when reading in the secondary source something that looks relevant to nourish your research. So you read an author who is speaking of somebody else who has done this and this and this, and if you consider that this will be very useful for your own work, please go to the original text, read it by yourself, and maybe you will understand it differently as the other one. I would just give an example. I have worked a lot on the creation of irrational numbers by Dedekind. The first time that I read about Dedekind, I read an author who explained that for Dedekind, a real number was a cut. So I was very surprised, because a cut is an interval. And when I moved to the original text in English, and then I look at the text in French, and this is not at all what Dedekind say. Dedekind say a rational number is a number that I create to make operational the cut. It is calculus. And when I asked to some German-speaking people, and he told me, yes, this is also the case in the original text in German. And it's very different perspective on the cognitive point of view. So I think it's very important not to, because after you can see in many books that the irrational number by Dedekind are cuts, but it's not the case. It is not what he said. It is not what he elaborated when you want to elaborate the irrational numbers. So this is just an example, but there are other examples also. If you want to be sure to understand well what an author said or wrote, please wrote the original source. Because
Thank you.
Interpretation, wrong interpretation or not precise interpretation, they may be transported, and then they become maybe less and less relevant for the original.
Yes, thank you. And then I appreciate how you began with this, your advice that treat or think about the research you are doing as a postgraduate student as an adventure. I think this is a good way of framing an advice and also the different levels you presented. So great, thank you. So you have a very long experience. You have been doing a lot of research. As you presented at the beginning, you've been moving from very young to university mathematics. So we know that it might be very challenging to say that is the best book or the best article, or this everybody must read, or this should everybody knows, but there might be something that you might be telling to your colleagues or postgraduate students. You should read it. You must read it, a book or an article. Do you have a list of something of that? And why this one? You already mentioned this with original source, to read, to go first to our original source, to create your own understanding of the concept or a term, but
yeah. So this is a very difficult question, but I will say that I will give free books, not papers but books. The first book that I will recommend to young researchers, and especially in Europe, not only, is the book on the European traditions in didactics of mathematics, which has been co-edited by Werner Bloom, Michel Artigue, Maria Alessandra Mariotti, Rudolf Stresser, and Maya van den Heuvel-Palmuysen in 2013. This book was written after the thematic afternoon in Hamburg during ICMIT 13. It presents details of tradition in didactics of mathematics in 6 European regions. Why I considered it valuable for young researchers? Because this allows to keep in mind the history and epistemology of the didactics of mathematics as contribution to the future of the research. So the book has been written by people who were either at the origin of this tradition or very involved in this tradition. And I think it's very important not to lose the tradition when we are moving to the future. So I think this is very important. And there are these 6 regions, and we can see also the interaction between the research in Europe. There is really a European domain of research in didactics of mathematics, which is very important, and which, of course, YERME and YERME are very important for this development. So this is the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The second book that I will recommend is the 19 ICMI study book, which is Proof and Proving in Mathematics Education, but will not. This book was co-edited by Gilana and Michael de Villiers, who were chair of ICMI study. It was published in 2012. Why a book on proof and proving? Because proof and proving are key aspects of the teaching and learning of mathematics, whatever the level and whatever the domain, the specific mathematical domain. So I think that every researcher has things to learn from this book, could present a rich landscape from primary school to university and could address a variety of mathematical topics. So I strongly recommend to look this book, and you know that now this book is in free, accessible on the Springer links, because there are a lot now, a number now of ICMI study books who are free available, and this one is among these books. So it is very easy to go to it, to go inside and to say, of course, not every chapter will interest everybody, but I think that nearly everybody can find at least one chapter which is interesting for his own perspective. So I recommend this book. And the third one is the book by Guy Brousseau, Theory of Didactical Situation in Mathematics for the period 1970-1990. This book was co-edited by Nicolas Balachev, Martin Cooper, Rosamund Sutherland, and Virginia Woolford in 1998, and they made translation. This edition intended to display at an international level the work by Guy Brousseau, who has been a very creative French researcher from the early 70s. And he developed both theoretical and methodological, very powerful tools to address the various challenges of mathematics education. He did this in the frame of an experimental primary school, École Michelet in Bordeaux. So everything that he developed in the theory and the methodology were experimented by the teacher of this experimental school, and which was something very, very interesting. And it is a very strong tools that he provide. And Guy Brousseau was the first Klein Awardees recipient. He won the first medal. It was in 2003. And the Felix Klein Award is for the lifetime academic achievement in mathematics education. So we were very proud in France, but Guy Brousseau was the first one, and also because Guy Brousseau is, the work by Guy Brousseau is used by nearly not every researcher, but a lot of researchers in France. And when we educate in didactics of mathematics, we educate with this theory, among others, not the only one, of course. But and for those who are interested, apart with the book, there is a unit which is on the ICMI Amor website. What is Amor? Awardees Multimedia Online Resources. These have been developed in particular by Jean-Luc Dorier, and those who were either Felix Klein or Freudenthal or Castelnuovo medals, there are projects of devoted a unit with videos explaining the work and so on. So it's a very also a good way to know better about the work of this researcher, and I recommend strongly the book and the website.
Thank you, Viviane. I think you gave us a very insightful proposals of the three books and a reason for reading those books. And I think I was just thinking myself, problem. Yeah, okay. I think I will look at the second book you proposed. Let's see which chapters might interest me, and then I can think myself, to reflect over why do I find this particular chapter, or those 2 or 3 particular chapters from a book which you recommend interested for me, who is in the field of early childhood, which might be thinking, oh, but this is not very, but I think, thank you very much. And we very well know that this is a very challenging question to ask, because how can you choose? Because there's so many influences and so many reasons for why. One reason might be that you, in your own research, been influenced by, but you have chosen an approach to give us 3 books from what you think might meet a wider audience in the research of math education. So thank you very much, because I think this is also very, yes, a challenging question, as you said, but also gives a very good way of understanding the way of what might be important for the others to take, not just for yourself, and it also brings in a little of your red thread about the history of didactic, the history of didactics of mathematics, which you actually began with, that it also might be important for many, as you mentioned in the first book, to actually learn for the future from the history of didactics of mathematics in Europe. So thank you very much. We move into a question of what, in your opinion, of course, it might be many ideas, but in your opinion, what you think, where are we going? What are the topics? What are the challenges for the future research in education? In education in general, but maybe with links, or especially with links to math education. What do you think, if we might speculate a bit?
Yes, this is also a very challenging question. In my view, one of the main challenges concerns the various transitions throughout the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
This including Klein second discontinuity from university mathematics to mathematics education. This last Klein second transition, we had an international seminar last year with 13 sessions on this topic, which was very successful, and now we are preparing a special issue of journal Recherche en didactique des mathématiques. In my view, this question of transition, of course, it is already worked, but we need to work more in the idea of a back and forth between the different degrees and not as an overtaking. Mm-hmm. Very often transitions are thought as you have to go beyond and maybe to forget something you have learned before, or to overtake it. But I am sure, and it is in line with what I said at the very beginning of the developmental aspect of mathematics, that we learn from what has been learned before when we are moving up, and we should not lose this. And in some way, the second transition is you have to learn from university when you want to become a teacher at secondary school, but university mathematics educators can learn a lot from what happens at secondary school for the teaching at university. And this idea, and also for primary school, when you move to middle school, it's very, very important to not to consider that, okay, you have done a lot of things at primary school, but you didn't do math. Now you do math, you are at high school. At middle school, you do math. And when you arrive at university, still now, some colleagues, they say to their students, okay, until now, you have not done math. Now you do math. And then we do not understand why the students have difficulties with these very formal mathematics that are taught sometimes at university. But if you do not help the students to understand the links between these formal mathematics and the mathematics that they learned previously, you cannot help them. And also, you lose the epistemological aspect of the discipline. So for me, this is something very important. And I think that there is still a lot of work to do on this topic, many things to do. And another challenge, I think, concern the relation between mathematics and other disciplines, interdisciplinary. And in particular, with mathematics and computer science, not only, of course, for example, mathematics and physics, who has a long history of interaction. Mathematics and biology, which is more recent and which need to be developed. But there is really a challenge to work on the interaction between mathematics and computer science. First of all, these two disciplines share some epistemological background, and in particular for what concerns logic and language, and also discrete mathematics. And there is a lot of use of computer science now also in mathematical activity, for example, the use of provers, assistant provers, and now there are assistant provers that are used in mathematics education. How can we use them? Which questions these kind of tools raise for mathematics? Which knowledge of didactics of mathematics are relevant for thinking what we can do with this kind of tools from computer science. So I think there is really a lot of work to do in this aspect. And now there is a community which is developing in mathematics education on this topic all around the world.
Thank you, Viviane. So they are topics, there are challenges, but there's also a future to in with your examples. There is to learn, but there's also things that they've been learned that needs to be raised up or appreciated. Like as you said, the example as you began with the transition from where we need. There is an important aim to go back also, not just the future, because there's to take with you, as you said, and that we need to appreciate maybe more, use it more, or understand more might be also a case. That is little what I bring with me, and yes, it is a challenging question. However, they are always future topics, and as you said, and which are linked to the past. And I think that is the important message I bring with myself from the way you are thinking about the future research in education, where the past is present, important as a part of it. In regards to what you say. So let's go to, before we go to the last part of our talk, if you look back last 6 months, which will be the first half of this 2023, it can be work-related, but it don't have to. We know that you are Professor Emeritus, but as far as to my knowledge, you are involved still quite a lot in research society. So what is your biggest takeaway or learning from last 6 months? Would you like to share that with us?
Okay, I would like to share with you, but maybe it is 8 months, because it is back to November 2022. In November 2022, I have been invited as a professor by the mathematics department of the University of Milano. I was invited by Laura Branchetti and Ottavio Rizzo. I have a collaboration with Laura Branchetti that I met in YES. And then we developed a collaboration on analysis and calculus at university. And they invited me to provide a doctoral course for the students in Italy. And I met them and I met the students and we had a lot of discussion. And it was very, very interesting for me. I was very happy for this. Of course, I was not able to have my course in Italian because I am not fluent enough. I did it in English, and it was a little bit a pity for me speaking English with Italian students. But it was very, very interesting to have these doctoral courses that I did sometime and in some way in France and also in other countries in Italy. And for me, it was really a very nice time for professional and also for tourism, and because Milano is a wonderful town. I have also some days in Bologna, and this is what I wanted to share with you. So maybe what I would like to say is that when I was not retired, and when I went to do something abroad, in general, I had no time for tourism, not at all. And I would not have been able to say yes for this kind of invitation 1 month in Italy when I was in position. So I was so happy to be able to say yes, to take time to work. Also, we have organized a seminar on proof and proving on Saturday in Milano, and also to visit the town and to see friends and something like this. So this is something that I had to wait until being retired to be able to do this.
Yeah, to be able to go and do seminars, to do a course for PhD students, to both work with the research and collaborate, but also see be able to have enough time to enjoy the cities or enjoy and I think this is a very important part, isn't it? As you said, you wouldn't be able to dedicate so much time before, but now you can do it, and I think that is great to be able to dedicate more time for those kind of adventures, but still be able to meet students and work with them, collaborate, and because I can imagine that there's been very interesting meetings with PhD students in Italy during your course and the seminars and lectures, yes, which gave you, I presume, quite much good energy too.
Yeah. So
we will go to the last part, which we call a little from a private corner. And this is like a last round up questions which we have for you. So the audience, the listeners can get a few insights more, which follows you from your career as a research in mathematics education, the knowledge that is based on your experience, and then you as Viviane. So how do you spend your time outside work? We know, of course, you are not working fully at the university anymore, but you're still working. So how are you spending your time when you are not doing research, Viviane?
Yeah, first of all, there is the family, of course. I am a grandmother with 4 grandchildren. So it's very interesting. And I spend time with them, also friends, of course. And for all my life, even when I was working a lot at university, I love reading. I love go to movies, listening music, theater, So I always keep time and save time for this activity. So I never stop reading all kinds of books, not only professional one, but a novel or poetry and something like this. So for me, this is very, very important. I need this, definitely.
Yeah, and that try to dedicate time for, as you said, other things outside work. Yes, thank you. So we are coming with one more tricky question, and we know that you will give us an answer, or we can see. So when was the last time you did something for the first time, Viviane? It can be something which has to do with everyday life, that can be something work related, or some skill you developed or something. So when was the last time you did something for the first time?
I think 10 years ago, I make a cruise in North Europe, Scandinavia.
Okay.
And it was the first time.
And that was the first time. Thank you. So you have seen Sweden, Norway, and maybe went the whole way to Finland.
Yes. And also North Cap and also everything.
Yes. Thank you. So now we know that you have done this kind of trip.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that you would like to share with the YERME community? Anything that you think is important to send out? Please tell us.
Yes, I will share on you. I think I spoke a little bit during the interview, but I would like to move back to this. What I would like to share is keep your mind open. Confront your ideas with both senior researchers and young researchers, while keeping your own research avenue. This is not so easy. This is not so easy because sometimes you discuss with a senior researcher and then you think that what you do is not what you should do and something like this. Or you discuss with young researcher and you say, what they do is wonderful, this is what I should do. But of course, what you should do is what you want to do. So this is what I mean by keeping your own research avenue, so you can take everything and many things when confronting ideas, when discussing, when sharing, and so on. But it's very important to keep his own research avenue because every researcher is a creator. Research is creativity, and I am completely sure of this. And creators, they can have inspiration, but they keep their line of creation. And I think it's the same for research. So it's something that I would like to share with a young.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that is a very nice way to end the interview. So the message you are sending is to keep working with what you are interested in. That is what you will benefit from. And I think little what you said at the beginning, where the way that your interest comes from somewhere, you want to discover or learn something, and that is how also you began your own career path, with interest in logic and interest in didactics and the didactics of mathematics and students' difficulties, and that brought us into your advice. So I think that is a great way of as a last word. Is there, Viviane, would you like to say something more? Anything else, or before we end it?
I would like to thank you very much. you and Dylan for this interview, for the pleasure to discuss, to exchange, for all your comments after my answers and so on. I am very happy, and I would like to say to the YERME community that I am always very interested in the work by young researchers. You are the future of the research, and you should be proud of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Viviane.